Hello everybody. This is Professor West. Welcome back. As some of you may or may not know, if you've watched some of my other videos, I make a lot of these videos to try to help my students. So feel free to check those out. Right now I have a whole series of Java and C# videos posted, as well as some on other topics that may help. The topic of this one is going to be how to make your code better. Many times, there's things that you can do in your code that may seem like something small or may seem like something obvious, but some people just don't know. And it's those little things that you may not know that could keep you from getting the job that you want. So I'm going to walk you through some of those today and hopefully help. And these are things that will make your employers more happy and make your coworkers more happy with the code that you write. So with that in mind, the first thing you want to do is to always plan your program. A good plan is extremely important, especially as your programs become more complex. I cannot tell you how many times I've assigned a program to my students and they all sit down and just start writing the code. That's fine for small programs, but the bigger your program gets, the crazier that sounds. So think about it like this. A plan for your program is sort of like blueprints. Can you build a treehouse without a set of blueprints? Sure. I mean, the floor may not be even, the door may stick when you try to open it, the windows may be catty-cornered, but it's still a treehouse. You can still have fun. Try to do that with a skyscraper, and it's not going to work. It's probably going to be tilting and eventually fall over. So you always want to plan your program first. To do so, we're talking about using at least pseudocode and possibly flowcharts. And if you're unfamiliar with those, I've already done a segment on flowcharts and pseudocode, so feel free to look that up on my channel. But they are extremely important. And as you'll see, when you plan your programs, then when you start writing your code, it makes it a lot easier for you. So not only will your code be better and your program will be stronger and less easy to break, but it'll be easier for you to create that way. Okay, the next thing I want to point out is that you should always try to keep it simple. Now, I understand that some programs are, 800 pages of code or 15,000 pages of code, whatever. I'm not talking about that. That's complex. But you want to keep things as simple as possible within your code. So, there's always multiple ways that you can do everything. Every little task that you're going to do, there's going to be a lot of different ways. And for that, I like to use Google Maps as an example. Imagine you're planning a trip from Los Angeles to San Francisco. So you put it in your map. Here you go. It's going to take you like 5 hours to get there. But on the other hand, what if you start at Los Angeles and you go through Dallas and then Boulder, Colorado and up to Seattle and over to some other places over here and circle around and come over here, and it ends up taking you 150 hours, instead of 5 hours. Now, both trips start in the same place, and both trips wind up in the same place. But obviously, there's a difference here. And the same thing's going to happen with your code. There's going to be ways that you can do it like this, and there's going to be ways it's going to end up being like this. Now, you may not always be able to do it simple, but whenever possible, keep it as simple as you can. And that'll end up making things so much easier for you, especially if you end up having to update your code later. Look at this little trip here compared to all this. If you had to make just a couple changes, that could throw all this off, whereas here it would be a couple changes and then you're back. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is making your code easy to read. There's always things that you can do that'll make your code easier to read. Down here I have two examples of a website. These are the exact same code. They'll produce the exact same website. On this one, I have it all set up nice and pretty. I've got a couple spaces between the lines here. I've got everything all, nice, and each line is set up basically. On this one, I just jammed it all together, and when it gets to the end of the line, it scrolls over and makes it difficult to read. Even heading 1 is on separate lines. This is very difficult to read for you and me. Oops. But for the computer, it wouldn't care. The computer would run these two the exact same, and you get the exact same output. So it's only for your benefit that you would do this, but it's also for the benefit of your employer, your coworkers, everybody else. Because anybody that has to go in and update your code, or even just try to help you with your code, would appreciate it like this a whole lot more than they would like this. If you came to me with garbage like this, I'd probably just tell you fix it and bring it back to me, and then I'd look at it. I wouldn't even try to mess with it like this if I didn't have to. If you're my student, I would try to help you. But if you're a coworker and you bring this to me, no, I'm not even going to deal with that. Okay, next, don't reinvent the wheel. Okay, let's say you're a C++ programmer. You put this code in that says #include IOMAN IP. Now what that does is, that's going to tell your program how to accept input from the keyboard and from the mouse, and how to output stuff to the screen. That's all that line of code does. It imports a file that somebody has already written all the code to do all that. On the other hand, you could write all that code yourself. It's like 4 pages of code. You could sit down at the beginning of every program and you could write 4 pages of code before you ever start on the rest of your program. Or you could just include this line. And the same for Java. There's the import Java utility program or file. And it's so much easier to just add these lines than it is to try to reinvent the wheel and do it all yourself. And throughout your programming, there's going to be a lot of cases where there's already some predefined function that you can use, so you don't have to write it all yourself. So just be on the lookout for those, and maybe even make a list of ones that you use a lot, so that you know where they're at and you can find them. It'll make your programming so much easier, and everybody knows what this line does. Every C++ programmer is going to know what this line does. You're not going to have to explain it to them, although you could put a little comment here. But if you had 4 pages of code, they might take them 2 days looking at it to even realize that that's what you're trying to do. So just keep it as tight as you can. Don't reinvent the wheel. Next, if you see a problem, fix it. So let's say you're on a team and you're all working together and you spot a problem. It doesn't matter if it's a bug or a syntax error or a logic error or any kind of problem at all. Maybe the program just isn't quite doing what it's supposed to do. Fix it. If you can't fix it, tell your boss. Or you may even tell your boss and then fix it yourself. But either way, let somebody know so it can be fixed. Because the sooner you find these problems and fix them, the easier it is for it not to become a massive issue for everybody. If you're working on one of those programs that's 800 pages of code, and there's 10 of you working on it, and you wait until the whole program's written to point out that, oh gee, this isn't exactly what they wanted us to do, they may have to rewrite half of that code. So don't do that. If you see a problem, fix it right then. Or help, or get the boss, somebody on your team, somebody needs to fix it. Requirements and specifications. Most people hear the word requirement and they think, oh, this has absolutely got to be there, and no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's almost never the case. There's always going to be at least some wiggle room. Often there's going to be a lot of wiggle room. I use the example here of Burger King. They always had the advertisement that said, have it your way. And the purpose of that was to say that you could order your hamburger however you wanted. So if you wanted no tomatoes, or if you wanted extra cheese, or if you wanted 4 pieces of cheese, or whatever, you tell them and they can fix it. But that's not completely accurate. Have it your way. If you decided, hey, I want pizza on my burger, they couldn't do that because they didn't have pizza. If you decided you wanted a veggie burger, back then they didn't have veggie burgers. I don't know if they do now. They might. But the point was, just saying have it your way doesn't necessarily mean that you could do anything you want. There's always going to be limits. There's always going to be exceptions. So even if somebody says, my program absolutely has to do this, there may be a way at some point where it might not do it exactly like that. So just keep that in mind. And let's see. The next one I put, the client is often wrong. You have no idea how many times I've heard somebody want something on a program and then come back later and go, oh no, that's not what I meant. Or, gee, I forgot to tell you I wanted it to do this. One time I was working at a private college, and our head, the guy that ran the school, the director of the school, his administrative assistant disappeared for like 2.5 weeks. So we all assumed she was on vacation. And one day I saw her coming out of her room by the bookstore, and I asked her how her vacation went. And she looked at me and she was like, "Are you kidding? I am not on vacation." Turns out she had been going through every single student's schedule for the next term. And we had several thousand students at the time. Every single student, and making a list of every book that they would need for every class that they would take. So she could order all the books, because in another week or so the classes would start. And she had been doing this for like 2.5 weeks. Then she told me that once the term began and they passed out all the books, she would have to do almost the exact same thing, make a list of every single student and every book that they got, and so that they could keep track of all that stuff. So I was shocked. I had never heard of anything like that. That's so much work. So I told her, I could do that with a program. And I took it back to my students, and I explained the situation to them, and I let them create the program as a project, and I just guided them through it. It took us about a half of a day, and the program read every single name, every single class that student would take, and then kept track of how many books they needed. And then we wrote a similar program at the end that did the other part that she needed, where it kept track of how many books was given out and all that stuff. Took us a half a day to write this program. And that saved her 2.5 weeks at the end of the term, and then another 2.5 to 3 weeks at the beginning of the term. So that's almost 6 weeks worth of work that this lady would have had to do. And the terms were like 2 months. So that's 6 weeks out of 8 or 10 weeks that she was going to have to be doing this stuff until they could find somebody else, because the original lady had quit. So she had no idea that I could create the software that would do this. And the same is true over and over in businesses. Business people are business people. They don't know what you can do with your programs. So you may have to guide them a little, make suggestions, ask questions. But often what they start off thinking they want isn't what they're going to end up wanting. So just keep that in mind. Don't be a show-off. You may think it's cool to do something with your code that nobody else can do. But that's not going to make people happy. Your clients aren't going to be any happier with it because they're not going to see the code. Your boss is going to be unhappy because if you're the only one that can do it, then you're the only one that can fix it. And rather than having a team work on a problem, now you're the only one that's going to be doing it by yourself. And additionally, that's almost like a demotion for you, because when the time comes, instead of being able to write a program for the, whatever they're doing at the time, you're going to have to go back and update this program. Whereas that's something that a lower or junior member might typically do. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you end up doing something like that. I put the example here of the race car driver. What if a race car driver fixed his engine so that he was the only one that could work on it? In the middle of the race, he pulls into the pit stop, and normally 4 or 5 mechanics would run over there and start working on it while he sits in the car. But now he has to get out of the car and go fix the problem himself, and then get back in the car so he can drive. It's going to end up taking him a whole lot more time than if he just let the regular mechanics work on it. Next, be very generous with your comments. Do not. That's one thing that a lot of programmers don't like to do. They don't like to put comments in their code. And that's ridiculous. A comment is ignored by the program, so it's only there for your benefit. I put comments everywhere. Every single thing I'm going to do. If this were part of my code, there'd be a comment right here telling you what it's about to do. And the reason is, later, like let's say you get away from the program for 2 or 3 months and then you come back, you don't want to sit here and look at a big chunk of code and try to figure out what it's doing, when you could easily have it written right in English that says, hey, this portion of the code is going to do this and that and that. It's so much easier to have comments. And also, when somebody else is updating your code, it's going to help them a lot. They're going to look at it and be like, oh, okay, well, here's what this section of the code's doing. Now I see how it's doing it. It makes it so much easier. So they'll be very happy with you also. And as you're writing your code, when you're down here doing something, you're like, oh yeah, what was that other thing? And you can't remember where you did something or how you did something. You go up and find it in the comments a lot easier than finding it in the code, especially if your code has already gotten to 30 or 40 or 50 pages. It's so much easier to find it in a comment than to try to figure out the code. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed some of these tips. I hope they help you become awesome programmers. And, check out some of my other videos that's in my channel. And I'll be posting another one shortly. Enjoy.